Welcome. You're listening to the Do Video Podcast. Today is Monday, January 18th, 2021, and it's Thesaurus Day. Now, embrace your host, Zoe Wood, the video confidence coach.
G'day crew, and welcome to the Do Video Podcast with me, your host, Zoe Wood, the video confidence coach, your guide to personal branding growth, personal brand growth. See, I almost got through that tagline, but I didn't, and here we are. So, what I mean by today's episode title, no matter which way I've titled it, again, I am say as I do as I say, not as I do when it comes to actually preparing yourself for these things. But I listened to a podcast today, and this particular podcast is the Psychologist podcast with Scott Barry Kaufman. And this one was his one with Rich Roll1, and not the like meme or Rich Roll stuff, but it's actually a dude who achieves these great things, is an athlete, and always pushes past mental blocks and all that stuff. And one thing really resonated when as they were talking was the feeling of always being on, the pendulum of either you're completely on or you're completely off. And the reason that resonated with me is because it's something I didn't realize about myself, is that I always had to be, and always have had to be, doing something, be it good or bad. When I was either, working with people, hanging out with people, I would always have this instinct of something needs to happen now, of like, we should meet up, we should do this, we should do that. And I would always be like, all right, we need to get the ball rolling on things. And they definitely talked a lot about the flow state and always seeking that flow state. And flow state, for those who may not know that terminology, is when you just get really focused on something where you seem to lose time. You can't hear people are talking, but you drown them out. And you just get so focused on the task at hand that you just find flow and almost an enjoyment or a euphoric feeling from being able to do that task. And that can be a hobby, that can be work, that can be whatever it is. And I'm sure we all have our different flow states that we fall into. For mine, it's definitely video editing. It can be a chore, but eventually you get into that meditative state where you're just able to just keep going. But today I want to talk about something a little bit different, a realization that I found in myself. So today might be more of a rant compared to actually, this is how to build your personal brand, But if you feel like you've always been that way, where you feel like you've always had to either be doing something or, the swinging pendulum of your life, you feel like the swinging pendulum of extremes, then continue listening. You're listening to the Do Video Podcast. I relate this a little bit to me. So the best way to put it is I'm not really a shoot the shit type of person. Whenever I sit around with friends or colleagues or family and there is discussions about a problem that they're having and spitballing possible solutions in an attempt to fix it and attempts to fix the problem. And I enjoy those times. I enjoy being able to spitball ideas, this could be a possible solution, this could be a possible solution, this could be ways of fixing this, or coming up with ways to mitigate that, and all this stuff. No matter how relaxed or professional it is, whenever I find those times, I enjoy those type of times. But for me, the thing that always gets me, or the thing that I always find broken for myself, is when nothing comes of that. Where we do all this spitballing and idea taking, and then it's like, okay, you have all this information, all these possible solutions to a problem that you're facing, and you take none of them. You have an entire table full of ideas, and you just flip over the table and walk away. And that was something that I found that I was coming up a lot with in both my professional and personal life with friends and family, as well as clients or colleagues or people like that, where you would have this, sometimes hours and hours of conversation, and then nothing would come out of it. And it's not that I would get aggressive or anything like that, because I wouldn't want to, get aggressive in that sense. But I would find myself just being utterly confused as to, we've just spent hours talking about the solution to this problem, and you've agreed that all of those points are good. Why aren't you taking any action on them? And people would, look at me or give me weird looks or just be utterly confused because, we're just, shooting the shit. This isn't real. This isn't talking about stuff. It's like, then why did we do this? This feeling of constantly using my time wisely, in other words. And I always felt like I was broken because that was the way that I always felt on the inside. I always felt that I was losing time, that I was always behind on everything. And I always needed to be constantly doing something, an activity or habit or something like that. I needed to be listening something. I needed to be consuming something. I needed to be saying something. I just need constantly be doing. And then there was these people that could just coast along, who didn't have a feeling either way. And I don't mean people who are under any drugs or any mental health issues in that sense. I mean people who are just, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Cool. And that infuriated me. Those type of people infuriated me. But the reason I get back to that swing and pendulum of energy is because either I was doing everything to the best of my ability, pushing as hard as I possibly could in every aspect of my life, or I was the completely opposite end of this, the pendulum, and completely in the bed, in a ball, crying, not doing anything for days, not eating, not drinking, not doing anything. Now that could obviously relate to my mental health issues. But it just confounded me when people didn't have this sense of urgency whenever it came to the ideas of, like, you want to be able to achieve something. You want to put what you say into actions. Be a man of your word. Be a woman of your word. Be a person of your word. That if you're going to do something, you do it. You put actions in place. You, find a time to have a coffee date. You say, I'm going to talk to this person. Then you write it down in your diary. At a particular date and time, I'm going to call this person to talk to them. Like, you have these things that are just so easy to do, and that always perplexed me, even as a child. Speaking of which, I'll talk about one of those now. Do Video Podcast. Now, I could be getting a bit too personal, but I'm not going to be talking anything about my family life. But one thing that I found very strange, or people that I would come across in story time, is after high school, and when I was during TAFE and running my business, I was working with an ex-friend now, or a friend at the time, where they would have these grand ideas. These, we should do a podcast, we should start a YouTube channel, we should start a website, we should do this, we should do that. Just, for fun, to take some time to learn, to, all these things. And they would have these grand gestures and talks. And whenever I would, talk to them, or whenever we would meet up for anything, there would just be these grand ideas. And we would talk hours and hours and hours upon, how we would make the website look, what type of things we would talk about in the videos, do this, do that, do this, do that. And just all these things that, like, every time we would talk, we would spend hours about these essentially fictional things that we were planning on doing. And by the end of these hour-long talks, I would be there going, cool, all right, when did you want to do a planning session? Or did you want me to create this and that? Or like putting anything and everything that we talked about and putting it into action. And then nothing would come of it. Or I would be doing all the work and heavy lifting because that's the type of person I am. And even back then, that's the type of person I was. I did not enjoy wasting time. I have since learnt, and I have since grown, and, grown is a selective term, where I can now appreciate that just sitting down, meditating and breathing is not wasting time. Spending time reading webcomics is not a waste of time. It is a useful part of my time because it helps me de-stress and enjoy myself. I've learnt that since then. But going back to the main crux of this podcast is this feeling of always being on and how I felt broken. How I felt like everyone around me, for some reason, didn't feel the same way. How we always had these grandiose ideas with no substance behind them. And there's been many, now of course I'm not going to name names, but there's been many clients or potential clients that I would have consultations with. And again, from them, there'd be these grand plans of what we want to achieve in, 6 months, or usually a ridiculous timeline. And I would be like, okay, breaking it down, we need to achieve this and this within the first month. And I would, have these, again, hour-long conversations where I would actually strategize and plan, being like, this is how we do it. And now this is, I have been informed it's related to my mechanical brain of I need to know how things work. And that could be related to it, but I believe it's also an entrepreneurial spirit or enthusiastic restlessness to be able to actually achieve the things that you talk about. Because talk is cheap, actions speak billions. And I personally hate it when people keep talking as if that's fine. As if, when politicians talk about this and that, and then 6 months later they still haven't done anything. Let's not bring politics into the equation. But I want to let you know, if you've ever felt that way, not just for one particular person, but if you've constantly felt this way, if you've constantly felt that you need to be able to achieving something or making something happen, or if you constantly feel like, I need to make this happen now, or you don't like the idea of theorizing things without any action behind them, you are not alone. It's a feeling I've had for a very long time and I'm still working on it. But being able to actually make it happen and see that displayed back at me in another podcast just made me feel seen and heard. And if you are listening or watching right now, I want to let you know that too. You are seen and you are heard. Sponsored spot. And our sponsored spot today is, surprisingly, who is it? I don't know. Who could it possibly be? It is me. Sponsoring today's podcast is the video confidence coach herself, Zoe Wood. So if you would like to subscribe to the Do Video podcast, and if you would be oh so nice and give us 5 stars on your podcast catcher of choice, I have to remember that we are me. I would be so grateful. If you really enjoy the podcast, feel free to reach out on any of my social medias and let me know what you think, ways I can improve, ways I can adapt, because that's what I always want to do. I always want to grow and adapt over time. So you might need to let me know if that's the case. You're listening to the Do Video podcast. So the podcast, again, that I was listening to was the Psychology podcast by Scott Barry Kaufman. So it's a podcast that's been running for a while now. It's in the hundreds of something. And it's really nice to listen to him because he, interviews all these great people that I've never heard of. And I find interest in their story as well as the psychological reasoning behind what they do. I'm not a psychologist, and ne'er do I ever wish to be with the stuff that they have to do, not to mention the years and years of schooling that they have to do. But it's something I've always been interested in. The reason why we do things, the reason that we take the actions that we take. And the topic of the podcast where we talked about where they talked about the enthusiastic restlessness and harnessing that feeling of always got to be on, always got to be doing something, always got to be achieving, always got to be striving, always got to be hustling. Having that, focus, being focused to good as opposed to bad habits, routines, or just vices. So Rick Roll discussed how he was, quote unquote, in his words, a functioning alcoholic, where he was practicing law, yet drinking himself under the table every night at home, where he'd managed to, through his addiction and that strive and that just need for that feeling, or the euphoric feeling that, alcohol or his addiction could possibly give him, being able to have that, focus on for him, having that need, that constant pendulum switch to be like, I always have to be doing something, and to be able to turn that off, to swing the other way by using alcohol as an addictive substance. And that, for example, that particular vice didn't exactly resonate with me. I don't drink alcohol, not for religious reasons, but just more of the case of it makes me feel crap, and I've already had chemo, and that's made me feel crap enough. I don't need any more of it. Thank you very much. But as he was talking about these feelings and this thought about having and achieving that flow state, that there's this feeling and this want of I just constantly need to strive to achieve that flow state, that sense of bliss, that sense of full and total concentration, and being able to swing that pendulum into action, into a positive way, to always be on, but in a good way. To always be consuming positive thoughts that will help in turn my actions to allow me to do more, to sleep more, to achieve more, to be healthier. And that's something that I found kind of interesting, that for something that I wasn't exactly into for the first 10, 15 minutes of the podcast, I was like, yeah, I don't really care. Yeah, it's great that you've achieved this and that, but what is a little bit of what is in it for me? Which I'm sure if you've been able to get to this area of the podcast, you've been asking yourself the same question. What is in this for me? But what I want to ask you as a question is, do you feel like you always have to be on? That you always have to be striving no matter what the consequences? I want to tell you now that I feel your pain. And I understand where you are coming from and that need to constantly, achieve and do better. And in my case, serve more people like you if you are listening. Be able to reach out and help people who feel like that they're just in that hole. That they just need to constantly doing something because we're constantly running out of time. And you may have noticed this when I started my business when I was 14, because I always felt like I was running out of time. I was as soon as I was 5, I was treated like an adult. I was and have been always treated like an adult, even when I didn't act like it. Even when I was subsequently a child, I was treated like an adult. So this feeling of wasted time, of losing my potential, of not achieving a flow state, of not being able to, always achieve more, I've slowly been able to, meditate, to work on myself, to be able to reflect my need for action and my need for drive inward, so I can focus on myself and how I can serve other people who may or may not be feeling this way. Hence why I do video, because I can have the most immediate action and you can understand and feel the most innately through the way that I'm acting, through my lovely hand gestures, and through my voice. Because like you, and I imagine many of the people that you're helping through your personal brand, they just want to be helped. Before we end the podcast, I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians and owners of the land on which I produce this podcast. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I stand with the traditional custodians of these lands in working towards a more equal future. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to face discrimination and disadvantage due to our country's colonial past. I stand with them in their fight against injustice. The Do Video podcast and Video Confidence Coach exist purely for educational purposes, and all information provided is of a general nature and should not be solely relied upon to make a branding decision. That's why you get me to consult with you directly. Wink, wink. My email is pod@vcc.training if you're interested. I ask if you like the show to subscribe and give me 5 shining stars on your review on your podcaster of choice. And join the Video Confidence crew by following me on my socials. Links in the show notes below. TLDW, too long, didn't watch. So, what I need to reiterate is you are not alone when you feel like you have to always be doing something, or you are just constantly achieving that flow state, or wanting to achieve that flow state. There are nuggets of wisdom in everything. So even if you feel like something like a podcast, like a video or a piece of content or anything doesn't relate to you, just sit back, listen and learn. There are nuggets in everything. Nuggets of wisdom, I mean, not just nuggets of gold. If there was, the gold price would go down. And make sure you listen to the psychology podcast episode, the Rick Roll episode in particular, so you can kind of get a feeling of what I mean. Hashtag not sponsored, like they, Scott has no idea who I am, but I highly recommend that you check out that episode. What's next? So I hope you've enjoyed today's little bit of a rant. And when I say a little bit, I mean very much rant. But I want you to check out my episode that I related to and I discussed previously, which is, do you need enthusiastic restlessness to succeed? Did you see that? I finally got the word out right. I think I'm getting better. I finally got the word out right. So let's focus here though. And I believe that's episode number 4. So if you do want to, the start of the episode does get a bit hazy and a bit like, where are you going with this, Zoe? But then by about 3 minutes in, I'm like on my stride and it works and makes a whole lot of sense. Kind of like this podcast was. Didn't make an entire lot of sense and it felt a little bit like, where are you going with this, Zoe? But I feel like we've achieved a lot today. So if you enjoyed today's podcast, I hope to see you at the next one. Or even hear you. Listen to? No, I can't listen to. You can only listen to me. All right, I know where I'm going with this, so I'm going to say goodbye, and I will have you listen to me on the next one. Bye.